Moving on from the realm of bread, let's talk about something a bit more flamboyant: wigs. Yes, wigs. You probably think of the lavish, towering coiffures of the French aristocracy, the kind that weighed more than your average suitcase and required an army of servants to maintain. But the truly bizarre part comes when we explore the regulations surrounding these elaborate wigs. Believe it or not, in 18th century France, there were laws that governed not only who could wear a wig, but what kind of wig they could wear and how it should be worn. Historians still debate whether these laws were meant to reflect class distinctions or whether they were simply a manifestation of the monarchy's desire to control every aspect of fashion. The more we look into it, the more absurd it seems. For instance, under King Louis XV's reign, there were laws that prohibited certain hairstyles for commoners, insisting that only those with noble titles could wear the most extravagant wigs. It wasn't just about the wig itself, but the amount of powdered hair that would accompany it. These laws weren't just about vanity, they were about status. If you wore the wrong wig, you could find yourself on the wrong side of the law. Let's imagine this scenario. You're an ambitious but poor young man living in Paris. You've saved up for months, and you've finally bought a wig, a fine, powdered wig that's as elaborate as it is fashionable. You proudly walk through the streets of the city, feeling like £1,000,000, only to have the town constable stop you and ask for your papers. Yes, your wig is that extravagant. And no, you don't have the right to wear it. You just made a costly mistake that could cost you more than just your reputation. It's a bizarre mix of fashion, faux pas, and legal trouble that we can't quite imagine today. But in 18th century France, if you didn't have the right papers to justify your wig, it could be seized from you. Or worse, you could face punishment. But here's where the story gets even stranger. Wigs were so crucial to one's social standing that they became the focal point of a wider trend that affected daily life. The laws weren't just about keeping the lower classes in check, but they also played a role in enforcing the extravagant tastes of the monarchy. In fact, during the reign of Louis XVI, wigs became so elaborate that they symbolized an almost comical obsession with status. Imagine layers of curls, lace, ribbons, and, oddly enough, small objects like ships or feathers tucked into the wig itself. These decorations were seen as a sign of nobility and wealth. And if you didn't conform to the laws about wig wearing, you could easily find yourself an outcast. But there was a catch. The noble class had a serious problem with lice. So much so that it was almost a running joke in the courts. The wigs they wore were, in fact, often a practical solution to the lice problem, but they were also an aesthetic necessity to maintain status. The irony, of course, is that the more extravagant the wig, the more likely it was that the wearer was hiding a colony of lice underneath all those powdered curls. Historians still argue whether this lice epidemic was truly a health concern or just another bizarre chapter in the larger-than-life narrative of French aristocratic excess. What's even more interesting is that wigs were such a significant part of the aristocracy's identity that their removal, particularly in public, was seen as an affront to one's dignity. To be seen without a wig was like stripping away one's social armor. In fact, the wig became a symbol of identity and pride, representing not just nobility, but a certain way of life that the commoners could never fully access. It was a game of one-upmanship that involved both style and wealth. The higher the wig, the higher your social rank, or so it was believed, but the legal limitations weren't just aimed at the poor or lower classes. Even members of the aristocracy found themselves subject to these laws if their wigs became too ridiculous. Yes, it was one thing to wear a nice, stately wig, but quite another to wear something that seemed to defy good taste or, worse yet, make you a target for ridicule. The French government wasn't having it. Wigs had to be appropriate, and for those in positions of power, wearing a wig that was deemed too outlandish could lead to social disgrace, or worse, a swift adjustment from the authorities. Historians still argue over the exact role these laws played in social dynamics. Was it merely a way of keeping the lower classes from stepping above their station, or was it an attempt to keep the aristocracy from looking too ridiculous? Either way, it's undeniable that these regulations contributed to an even greater sense of division in French society. If you were a commoner trying to break into the noble ranks, Wearing the right wig could be your ticket, or your downfall to SO. Imagine yourself back in Paris, strolling through the streets with your carefully chosen, perfectly fitting wig, only to be stopped by a local official who informs you that it's not quite the right style for your class. Your heart sinks. You spent your savings on this thing, and now it's all for naught. The concept of personal style, self-expression, and freedom seems light years away. In 18th century France, even your choice of headgear had a deep political meaning, and the wig laws were just another example of how deeply embedded class divisions were in everyday life. In the end, wigs are a quirky and somewhat absurd reflection of the rigid social structures of 18th century France. They weren't just fashion statements. They were tools of power, status, and sometimes even deception, whether hiding lice or flaunting wealth. They were a symbol of an era when how you looked was often more important than who you were. And no law could ever change the underlying fact that, in the end, wigs were just one of the many ways the French monarchy tried to assert control over the people's every move.